Hi, my name's Bill. I'm an alcoholic. I'm really glad to be here tonight. I want to thank Ann for asking me to come up. It's really a privilege to be here and to enjoy Solvang. What a beautiful town, and it's a beautiful day to drive up. And I want to thank my friend Ed for joining me, and we had a very nice trip coming up here today. It's really nice to be here. It's nice to be anywhere today, and I'm just very grateful that I'm alive and moderately sane. And I want to say hello to Brian, our leader, and wish Bob a happy birthday. And I want to extend a particular greeting to Mike and Robert, the two fellows that introduced themselves as being new to our program. And I just hope they and anyone else who's wondering whether this is the right place for them or not will keep coming back and until they find that this is a comfortable place to be, because it's sure been the best thing that ever happened to me. And that's all I ever wish to share with anyone else, that what happened to me. And I'm no authority on Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything that I say is my opinion, but all I can say is what's happened in my life, and it's been such a happy event for me that I like to share that with other people. I was interested in Solvang during the week too. It was on television twice. Once when it was incorporated as a city, and I think that's quite a milestone. And then everyone got to view the president voting in Solvang. And last Tuesday I voted also. I voted in Laguna Beach. I wasn't on television, but it was still an event for me to vote, because I'm acting like a real citizen now, doing things other people seem to do. And I drove up today in my own automobile, and I drove it myself, which I was unable to do for a long time. The car is registered in my name. It has a current license on it. I have a current California driver's license, and the car is insured. And if you had any idea of what it was like a few years ago, you'll realize that in itself is a major event. And maybe I should have been on television when I went to vote. I know that we're powerless over what the government does, and all we can do is the footwork. And I guess the footwork was trying to make an intelligent decision in voting. And I studied all the ballot pages and tried to do the best I could in trying to vote. And that's what I do today. I just try to do whatever I can to make the world a little better place. That's what I try to do. I don't always succeed, but I'm enjoying that. And I enjoy being in places like this. I spent a lot of years drinking. In the last few years, I also used drugs. And I was looking for some way to be comfortable, and I never found it. I did not find any way that I was comfortable with the rest of the world, or that I felt at home being myself. And finally, I overindulged in so many different things. I had to surrender, and what surrendered with me was my central nervous system. It wouldn't go anywhere anymore. And I had been looking for some sort of freedom, and the freedom that I found was in my bedroom. I couldn't leave the bedroom. I had the drapes pulled, and there was a sign at the front door of my house that said, "Do not knock, illness in household." And that was very accurate. And that's just the way I ended up. And I couldn't go to the grocery store. I couldn't drive on freeways. And I just hyperventilated as a way of life. And the fact that I'm somewhat nervous now, but nothing like I used to be. And when I first came into this group, I could not read Chapter 5. I couldn't do anything. I just tried to be as inconspicuous as possible. And when I was first asked to read Chapter 5, I said, no, I can't do it. And eventually I got a sponsor who said, yes, you will do it. And I said, before we even get to Step 3, I'll pass out. And he said, everyone will love it. And that's the kind of sponsor I have. So I had to start doing that. And I'm able now to stand in front of a group with a certain amount of ease anyway. I was told that I had an ego problem, and if I would just get rid of that ego problem, I could go places and talk to people. And I said, how can I have an ego problem? Because I have such a low opinion of myself. And I was told that to have an ego problem, you don't have to think highly of yourself, you just have to think frequently of yourself. Somehow that made sense. And well, yes, I guess I do have an ego problem. Someone else told me that those that worry constantly about what others think of them fail to realize how seldom they do. And I guess that's true too. I'm still very self-conscious. At the coffee break, I rushed off to try to wash my collar because I caught myself shaving and I saw a little bit of blood on my collar, which no one else ever noticed, but I knew it was there, so I knew that everybody was going to be staring at that. And so I'm still self-conscious, but I'm doing a lot better than I was. And being able to drive up here is a freedom, and to enjoy life today is a new freedom. Another thing my sponsor told me was that he absolutely insisted that everyone he sponsored lead a happy life. I thought, I'll never be able to do that. And, so I lead a happy life most of the time today. And I was told that after I gradually started recovering from the effects of too much booze and whatever, that I had a lot of other problems to contend with, and the answer to those problems are right here on the board, the 12 steps. I was told that's why we have 12 steps, and we start working those, and we'll be more comfortable. And I try to work those. I work those with great pain. I have not been an instant skyrocket to success. I work each step as it becomes painfully necessary to do so, and that's just the way it is in order to be comfortable. And I've had to examine a lot of things about myself. Suddenly, just like I came out of a fog, and suddenly here I am in the real world. And I've had to look at a lot of things, like I'm 51 years old and I'm not married. And what's worse, I've never been married. And this is kind of embarrassing, because most people in our group have such a colorful marital story. And I've been so confined that I haven't started. And so I've had to talk to some people in our group about that. And I said, geez, why is it that I just have never been able to get married? And I thought maybe if we went through all the tangled web of my adolescence, we'd come to some solution. And my friend just looked at me and said, well, you're selfish. And I thought, that again. And several other people suggested that maybe I was so self-centered I hadn't noticed there were other people around me. And well, yes, that's a possibility. Then I spoke to Mary Lou, a longtime member of our group, and she said, well, you know, Bill, you just drive ladies crazy anyway when you talk to them. And I said, why is that? And she said, you may not realize it, but you keep bowing all the time. And I did not realize that, and I'm very conscious of that. And when I start talking to people, I suddenly realize that I look like Charlie Chan on Speed. So I tried to do something about that, but the thing I'm finding, though, is that I've had all of these feelings of guilt and remorse all of my life, and I didn't know why. And today, all the vague feelings are coming into actual identifiable character defects that I can work on. And there is a solution for these, and it isn't something that's hopeless. And I've decided I'm not hopeless today. In fact, I'm glad to be me today, with all of my character defects. But they do make life uncomfortable. I live on a boat today, and I really enjoy that. I enjoy going to that boat during the day. Sometimes I go there in the middle of the afternoon just to rest and think, isn't this nice and comfortable to be on this boat? And I find the ocean very relaxing. So earlier this year, I went to my boat one day to just kind of sit down and relax and enjoy this lovely little boat, and it was chained to the dock. And with not only chained to the dock, there were notes all over the boat from the Internal Revenue Service. And that the federal government had seized my poor boat, and something about back income tax. And so I thought, uh-oh, and I ripped all the signs off because the other people in the boat harbor were already looking around, wondering what this man is, the Al Capone of the income tax set. And so I ripped the signs off, and I was about to go get some chain cutters and cut the chain, and then I thought, no, they're serious about that chain. So I left the chain, and I have a telephone on my boat, and right while I was standing there, my sponsor's wife called to tell me she had just come back from the doctor, and she'd had some very disturbing news. She had a lot of ill health. And so she started telling me about the doctor. She said she just couldn't go on one more day. She couldn't handle one more bit of bad news, and she's been a member of our group for a long time, and sometimes one day at a time is very difficult for her. And I said, you think you've had a bad day? You know what happened to me? And I told her about the chain, and then she spent about half an hour telling me about her experiences with Internal Revenue Service, and somehow she'd forgotten about the doctor, and I had forgotten somewhat about the Internal Revenue Service until the next day, as my sponsor called and suggested that we have lunch. And he said, how's everything at the boat? And I said, well, I'm not using it very much right now. In fact, I'm kind of tied up. So he, of course, had already heard all about it. And he said, is there some particular reason for this, Bill? And I knew better than to say it was their fault. I said, no, I didn't pay some back income tax. And he said, was this the first notification you had from them? And I said, well, no, there were other letters, but I didn't open them because I thought they were nasty. And so Tom said, you don't suppose this is procrastination again, do you? And I said, well, yes, it could be. Procrastination has always been the character defect I was going to work on next week. But I decided it was time to work on that right now. I was tired of having that chain there, so I had to get the back income tax taken care of. And Tom said in the meantime, if I was unhappy about being chained up, I could come and stay at their house for a while. And that's another feeling that I have. I know that no matter what happens, there's always some place to go. There's always someone who says, geez, it's going to be all right. You can come and stay with us for a while. But I got that taken care of. But that's been my success in working the steps. I don't do anything until I'm chained to the dock. And then it's time to work a step and go on. And I'm afraid that's the way it is. But somehow things are getting better. I didn't realize there would be any chance at all when I was a child. I felt hopeless from the time I was a little kid, and I don't know why. I just, my folks were loving family. They were middle-class people in Hollywood, and I had a brother who died when I was 4 and he was 7, and after that I was just raised as an only child, and we didn't have any violence in our household. We didn't have any outward affection either. I think it was during the period that people just didn't do anything like hugging and kissing, or we shook hands to show any sort of extreme affection. That's just the way our family was. And in fact, I called my folks Burl and Tom. I did not call them Mom and Dad because that was too personal. And Mr. and Mrs. Hosser seemed a little bit formal. And that's just the way it was in our household. And my folks said, whatever happened, don't ever tell anyone any feelings that I might have, because that was something very personal. It wasn't to be discussed in the outside world, or certainly at school. So I just went through all my school saying, everything's very fine, thank you. And I would come home from school, and my folks would say, how is everything? And I'd say, everything is fine, thank you. And the only person I ever confided in all through that period was our Irish setter. And I told him everything, because he showed me unconditional love. No matter what had happened that day, he wagged his tail, and he was happy to see me. And he didn't talk. So he was a trusted companion. But aside from that, I didn't tell anybody anything. And when I started doing my 4th step, I was told that perhaps some resentments would come out. I didn't think I had any resentments, and immediately some resentments came out against my parents when I started thinking about this, because I thought, why didn't they tell me it was okay? Why didn't they tell me that I didn't have to feel so awkward and left out? And but how could they possibly know? Because I never told them anything that was going on, or I never told them how I felt. They had no idea. When I just felt different. When I was in the 2nd grade, they took our photograph and we went to the Union Depot to watch the train come in. And I saw that photograph, and someone was looking at that one day, because I had him with a bunch of stuff, and looked at all these little kids, and he said, well, which one are you in this photograph? And I just automatically said, well, I'm the ugly little kid. And he looked, and he said, Bill, they're all ugly little kids. I didn't know that. I didn't know I looked like all the other kids. I always knew that there was something about me that was different. And sometime during that same period, some girl told the other people in the class, when she didn't think I was there, that she didn't like me. And of course, I'm not very sensitive. So today that doesn't bother me nearly as much as it did in the 2nd grade. But things like that kept happening, and I just didn't know what to do about it. And then it got worse. Then we got into athletics. And I was the worst person they ever had in gym class. I couldn't play kickball. I couldn't do basketball. I couldn't find the rope. I couldn't run. I just couldn't do anything. I realized today that I was enormously self-conscious, and that's one reason that I couldn't do anything. But I didn't know that at the time. I just figured I was hopelessly awkward. And I knew everybody was watching. And at any time I went around after school, everyone would look and say, hey, there's the kid that can't do gym class. And I just felt terrible about that. I didn't ever tell anyone about that until when I was doing my 5th step. You can see how exciting my 5th step is. I was telling about how awful I was in gym class. But it was, for me, that was just a secret that I never wanted to share with anyone. And I didn't know that anything could be done about that either. But when we would play softball, as an example, and I would always be put off in right field. And then everybody hit the ball to right field. And I would just stand there, and this little voice kept saying, "You're going to drop it. You're going to drop it." And every time I dropped it, and every time that little voice said, "Told you so." So I just decided I was never going to step inside a gym again. Now, this year, beginning of this year, my friend Pat in Laguna Beach told me he was going to some gym 3 times a week out in Laguna Canyon, and I should try that. I could lose weight, I'd feel better, it'd be good for me. I said, "You are not going to get me inside a gymnasium for anything." And then he started telling me, well, all the other people in our group were going to this, and I'd feel right at home, and I wouldn't be awkward. And so I started going, and it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I go to the gym 3 times a week now. I missed the last couple of weeks because I had the privilege of going to the Hawaii conference, which was another freedom. But normally I go to that gym, and about half an hour afterwards, I just feel great. And if anyone had ever told me that gym class would make you feel great, I would have been one of the most active persons there. I didn't know that it made you feel good. And I just really enjoy these machines, and I don't feel nearly as self-conscious. The only thing is, it's a co-ed gym, and they have these Nautilus machines. And it's kind of awkward when you walk away from the machine and some 85-pound girl comes and doubles the weight. So I've solved that problem. I double the weight before I walk away. So I'm getting along fine. The only thing is that I lost about 30 pounds during the course of this year, and I had to buy some new clothes. Now, this evening I had dinner at a smorgasbord place in town, and I think I gained all 30 pounds back again. But I have discovered that I really enjoy gym today, and I wish I had known that in high school. I just couldn't get along in high school. We had a social group called the Mighty Mites, and I would have joined the Mighty Mites for anything. I wanted to be in the Mighty Mites. And they wore red jackets, and I think they did exciting things like drinking beer and smoking cigarettes, things that I would never have thought of. But I was never asked to join, and so I went all through school thinking, if only I could have been in the Mighty Mites, then I could have been happy and I could have gotten along with these other kids. That's something else that came out when I did my inventory. I realized I had a resentment against Jim Easton, this fellow that I'd known. He's not an alcoholic, it's okay to tell his name. I've known him since I was in grammar school, and Jim was the president of the Mighty Mites, and so he's still in the car business in Glendale. And a few years ago when I was doing this inventory, I had lunch with him. And during lunch I said, "Jim, you know, I've had a resentment against you for 30-some years. He said, "Oh, why is that, Bill?" And I said, "Because I didn't get to join the Mighty Mites." And he thought about it for a while, and he said, "Well, why on earth would you have wanted to join the Mighty Mites? All you did was study all the time. We thought you were a snake. We didn't think you were someone that would want to join that." And I said, "Well, you didn't know, but I really felt left out." And he said, "You know, I've had a resentment against you all these years because you came from a nice family, and you had a mother and a father and a home to go to every night. And my father left when I was born, and my mother died when I was 8, and I was raised by my uncle in a little apartment. And I would have given anything if I could have had your family." And all of a sudden, we started looking at each other, and Jim said, "Geez, we've known each other for 40 years or more." And he said, "It's the first time we've ever really communicated." And he started crying. And I said, "Jim, grab hold of yourself. You mustn't cry in this big restaurant. People will think the Cadillac business is that bad." And Jim said, "The Cadillac business is that bad." But that's the way it's been. I have discovered that I can communicate not only with just people in Alcoholics Anonymous, but with people on the outside. And I have a much better feeling of what has happened. And as a result, my idea of what happened during my school days has changed. It really wasn't as gruesome or as hopeless as I thought. Something else came up, and that was that I had a resentment against my dad because he was a very strict disciplinarian, and I thought he was very harsh on me. And at times my sponsor is very harsh on me, and I started having these same feelings where I resent any sort of authority. And this year I started feeling better, and I started doing some things on my own that were just self-will run riot, because my sponsor suggested that it would probably lead to some sort of unhappiness. And it's really easy to follow instructions when you're hyperventilating. But when you start feeling better and life is going along a little better, you think, well, maybe I'll just be a little more adventuresome. And so that's what happened. And I not only have a sponsor, but I have a steering committee, I would say, of 4 or 5 people that I ask for advice, because I don't really trust my judgment all the time. And sometimes I ask them for backup opinions. My friend Ed is on my steering committee. And when my sponsor told me that I was going off on my own path and was not following the steps or doing God's will, he didn't feel at that particular moment. I thought, well, I'll ask these other people. And I asked all 5 of them, and they all said the same thing. Tom's right and you're wrong. So the answer was obvious. I needed a bigger steering committee. So I started asking other people, and then finally it reached a point where I thought, if anybody agrees with me, I'm going to. But nobody did, and I had to contact my sponsor, and I had to say that one more time that he was right and I was wrong, and I was sorry that I'd upset him, and I had expected him to go into a lecture about, well, if you had listened to me to begin with, and instead all he said was, I love you. And I thought, isn't that easy? And I realized that anything that my sponsor says is out of love and kindness and understanding. And I realized, too, that anything that my dad said was out of love and kindness and understanding. And he was undoubtedly my first sponsor, even though I wasn't drinking while he was still alive. He died over 30 years ago. But all he was trying to do was to make me be a happy young man. And I didn't realize that. And I told that to someone. I said, I finally realized that my dad just wanted me to be a decent, moral human being. And my friend said, well, he succeeded. I said, he succeeded? He said, well, yes, you are a decent, moral human being. And then I got very misty-eyed and emotional about it, not because he thought I was, but because I thought I was. And today, I do feel like a decent, moral human being, and I realize that all of this discipline was meant for a reason. And it's removed a resentment against my dad. He died over 30 years ago, and yet I feel closer today to him than I ever did before. And I don't know how to make an amend to him other than by trying to be what he would expect me to be, and to be a decent person today. And I know that he'd be proud of my life today, and I'm comfortable with that. I also discovered I had a resentment against my uncle. While my folks didn't drink excessively, my uncle drank all the time. And he was very upsetting. He'd come to our household at 3 o'clock in the morning, pounding on the door, and he'd be foaming at the mouth and falling down. He was trying to borrow money, and he just wasn't a pleasant person to be around. And I knew that he had a tremendous drinking problem, and I thought, I am never going to drink no matter what, because I saw what it did to my uncle. And I had a lot of run-ins with him where he would get upset with me, and the whole thing was very upsetting. My grandfather had said I could have his 1938 Buick after he died, as soon as I was old enough to drive. And soon after my grandfather died, my uncle drove it down Franklin Avenue and had a head-on collision with 2 other cars. He completely destroyed the car. And I didn't ask where they towed my uncle. I asked where they towed that car. And I went and I looked at it. It was a Muller Brothers in Hollywood, and I looked at it, and it was totally wrecked. And I thought, I will never forgive my uncle for this. I didn't even know whether he was alive. And he was alive, but our situation deteriorated steadily after that. And he died of an overdose of alcohol and drugs while I was still in high school. And he was only 49 years old. And even though he lived in Hollywood all of his life, when we had a funeral, we had to tell my grandmother that the services were private because no one came, just a few family members. And that was the lonely life that he had, and that was the lonely death that he had. And today I realized that, looking back, my uncle was an alcoholic, just as I am. And the only difference between us is that I found a way of life where I didn't have to drink, and he did not. He had to die while he was still drinking, and he never knew the happiness that I have found. And he was an alcoholic, and that's all you can say. And he didn't mean to wreck the 1938 Buick. He didn't want to spend his life alone, and he would have been very upset at having a funeral by himself. But that was the way it was. He didn't know that he had a choice. And I have a great deal of compassion for my uncle today, which is another resentment which seems to have disappeared as a result of working these steps. And the other thing that happened in high school, though, was I was told that it was time to start dating. And I just never did. Well, I was so self-conscious. And I finally got the courage to ask some girl if she'd like to go out that night, or not that night, but a later night, to have dinner and go to a movie. And she said yes, she would. So when I went to pick her up, her dad suggested I come into the den and have a talk with him, and it was a very Ozzie and Harriet kind of house. And so I went into the den, and we were sitting there, and he said that he knew that Ruth was a very fine young lady, and he trusted her, and he knew I was a fine young man, and he trusted me. But he wanted me to understand that they had a few household rules, and one of the rules was that Ruth had to be home at 1 a.m. And I thought, gee, that lucky Ruth, because I had to be home at 11. So that's the way my school career went. And then I didn't drink. If I had known drinking would make it any better, I'd have been drinking all the time. But I did not drink. I didn't want to be like my uncle. Then I went to college, and boy, things improved immediately. In the first place, I didn't have gym class. And secondly, I discovered accidentally that I not only seemed to enjoy drinking, but that I could drink beer faster than anyone else in the freshman class. And so we had a chug-a-lug team, and that's all we did was drink beer, and everybody would get drunk, and we would fall down on the floor, and it was just great. And, I felt that I was part of a group. It was the first athletic event at which I ever excelled. And I had lots of friends, and they were always happy to see me, and it was a very cheerful thing. And I stayed in college 8 years. I didn't want to leave for anything, but I finally had to leave school, and I got in the outside world, and it was like one big gym class. It was just, I couldn't do anything right. Other people all went driving off, and they all had station wagons and a golden retriever and a wife and a camel's hair coat, and I didn't have any of those things. I didn't have a wife. I didn't know how to get one. I didn't know. The only thing I knew how to do was to drink beer fast. And that's great when you're a freshman, but somehow when you get out of school, that loses a little of its appeal. And yeah, I would call up people and say, geez, you want to go out tonight and get drunk out of your mind? And they would say, Bill, we'd love to, but, you know, we have Little League and PTA, and this is bridge night. And I thought, oh, boy, what's happening to all these people? But I finally found a little niche for myself. I moved on a boat. And I had another uncle that went boating a great deal, and he introduced me to the life aboard boats, and so I was comfortable living on the boats down in San Pedro, and I spent most of my time hiding in that boat. Today I don't hide on my boat, most of the time, but at that time I would go and I'd close the hatch and just start drinking, and that made everything all right. And then on weekends people would come down their boat, and it was party time. We'd start partying about Thursday afternoon and do it till Monday, and we would barbecue on the dock, and that was fun, and I could fit in with those people, and that's what we did. We just drank all the time. There were certain disadvantages to this. A few of my friends died when they drowned from falling off their boats drunk, and I have a friend who's still paralyzed today from rolling his car down a hill coming back from the Greenland bar. So there were disadvantages, but most of the time that was working, and I felt good. And I did not have a regular job. I never sought employment because I knew I'd get fired right away. And so I worked for myself, and I fixed up old buildings and sold them and did quite well doing overall buildings. So that's what I did. I did overall buildings during the day, and I went down to the boat at night. And people in San Pedro thought I was the most happy, carefree person they'd ever seen. I drove around town in a 1930 Packard Roadster with the top down. I had a dog in the rumble seat. I always had a straw hat on and a T-shirt and shorts and no shoes. And if anyone had said, who is life's happiest bachelor, they would say, oh, Bill. My gosh, he lives in that beautiful boat and he has all those old buildings. And at night, after smiling at everybody all day long, I'd go down that boat, I'd close the hatch, and I'd write a suicide note. Because I just couldn't go on any longer. The only thing is, I'm the only person I know who edits suicide notes. And I could never get it worded just right. So I would have to rewrite it, and sooner or later I'd forget the whole thing. But that was the way my life went, and it didn't get any better. It kept getting worse, and I kept getting more drunk, and I was going into blackouts. And people were telling me things like rolling me down to the boat at night in a cart and just throwing me down below. And it was humiliating. And I thought, well, I've been on a boat too long. And so I thought, I'm going to do something else with my life. And I talked to some friends of mine in Laguna Beach in 1968, and Laguna Beach was under siege. They had been attacked by a whole group of hippies. And I thought Timothy Leary was producing them all. And so I said, well, what can I do to help? And they said, Bill, we need you down here desperately. There is this old hotel down near the beach in Laguna, and it's producing all of these hippies. And so I went by and looked at it, and sure enough, there were hippies coming out every opening. And it said smoke it on the side of the building. And I knew about hippies because 8 hippies had stolen a sailboat from a friend of mine in San Pedro. And I was there when the boat was retrieved. And the hippies were still on board. One of them was chained to the shrouds. And when I stepped on board, he just looked at me and he said, hey, buddy, I'll sign your head for a quarter. And I didn't see the humor in that at all. So when they said they had a problem with hippies, I thought, we're going to get those sons of guns out of town. It will ruin that beautiful community. I'm going to do whatever I can to help. And I said, I'll buy that old hotel and we'll turn it into a senior citizen center. Everybody was excited about it. There was an article in Daily Pilot, and the police department said they would do anything to help. So I thought, at last I have a cause. And that's my whole life. I've always looked for some sort of a cause. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And I will be Citizen of the Year. So I moved into this building. I wasn't going to trust this job to anyone else. And I called a meeting of everybody living in there. There were about 100 of these young folks at that time. And I said, you all have to move out of this building tomorrow. Law and order are being restored in this place, and the police department is behind me 100%, and if you're not out of here, we're going to start checking names and IDs and everything else, and it's going to be very uncomfortable, so I want you to understand that. And I meant it, and I thought, at last, I'm being a real person. And half an hour later, I was up in someone's room smoking pot. Now, I finally discovered after talking to these people what my problem was. I was a hippie. I didn't know that. My hairstyle, of course, didn't work, and I was a little old. But they started talking about their lifestyles, and they said they couldn't get along in the outside world. They didn't understand what it took to be a regular citizen. They seemed to be here without an owner's manual, and I knew exactly what they meant. I said, I know exactly what you mean. And they said, we don't know how to handle 9-to-5 jobs. And I said, I don't either. And they said, in fact, we have to stay loaded most of the time just to cope with things. And I thought, gee, I understand that completely. Let's sit down and talk about this. And so all of a sudden, I was thrown into a culture that revolved around the use of state-of-the-art drugs and Red Mountain wine. And I thought, that's just wonderful. And they were worried about inequalities in our system of justice. And they were worried about truth and honesty and love and all these noble pursuits. And I agreed with them. And the only way we seemed to be able to handle this was to stay loaded all the time. And that's what we all did. It's funny that a lot of those kids today are in Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of them came in with me. So did the building inspector that used to come by. And so did one of the policemen that used to make a frequent stop. We're all sober together now. And we've all agreed on one thing, and that is the qualities that we were searching for, the truth and honesty and love, we found in Alcoholics Anonymous. We found a comfortable way to live and to cope with the outside world with sobriety, and we never would have dreamed that at the time. We were just sitting around there. Someone would play a guitar, and we would all be messed up on whatever was available that day, and we would sit in front of the fireplace at night talking about what we used to be like, what happened, and what we were like now. And that's the way it went. So I stayed there 5 years. But finally that whole thing died out, and I thought, no, I'm not a hippie. I'm in the wrong place. And so I continued to try to find a comfortable way of life. And what happened is I kept drinking more. And the blackouts just really started plaguing me because I started driving in blackouts. And I would start off in Glendale and end up in Laguna and not know how. And I made those terrified trips down to the garage to see if my car was there and to see if anything was attached to it. And frequently my car wasn't there, and then I didn't know where it was. And this just went on and on. And at this time, I was having a lot of physical problems. I had pains in my back and pains in my side, and I was sweating a lot. No one told me that I had a tremendous problem drinking. Well, I didn't have a wife to point that out. did not get arrested for drinking. I somehow avoided that through no fault of my own. And I didn't have a regular employer who asked what happened to me during the month of March. And I really wasn't accountable to anyone. And so a few friends suggested that they would not enjoy having me around for dinner until I stopped drinking so much. I had a couple people told me I was going to kill myself if I didn't stop drinking. But aside from a few warriors like that, I just didn't seem to, I just still did not have a drinking problem. I had no problem drinking. And I had a lot of other problems. But I didn't know what to do. And someone said that I could probably take care of those awful blackouts if I just used a little cocaine while I was drinking. And so I tried that. And I had not done that when we were in the hippie hotel. We were very organic during that period. Just, we're not into it. But all of a sudden, that seemed to be the fashionable thing to do. So I tried that. And I don't think any decent, self-respecting alcoholic can use cocaine socially. I certainly couldn't, and pretty soon that was a problem. I almost died from that. And I just reached a point where I couldn't go anymore. I lost contact with reality is what happened. I just became disoriented. I was so fogged from all these darn chemicals, and I just was physically messed up. And I was 45 years old, and I just couldn't go on any longer. And that's the way I was when I arrived at this group. And I didn't know what to do. I just thought I was going to have to be institutionalized the rest of my life. But a friend of mine ended up in the care unit at South Coast Hospital in Laguna, and he said as part of being in that care unit, he had to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't even know they still had meetings. I didn't know anything about it. But I figured it would be a very dark room, and they would shut off the lights, and they'd show movies of diseased livers and head-on collisions. And afterwards, we'd go around to the local bars and hand out literature. That's what I thought it was. But I went to this meeting anyway, just to keep him company. And I was just amazed, because I walked in, and here was a group of people just as we had tonight. Happy people that were hugging and kissing each other and seemed really glad to see each other. In fact, when I first started coming to meetings, people would walk over, and I would think, uh-oh, I think that person is going to hug me. And it's the first time in my life I had ever really seriously been hugged by anyone. Now I really enjoy it. But that was and I was able to talk about my emotions, and I thought, isn't this amazing? And I thought all these happy people were family members of the alcohol. I didn't know where the real alcoholics were, but I kept coming back and kind of looking around a little bit, and I heard several people talk. I heard dear Norm A. talk, and I don't think anyone will ever be able to replace him, because he started talking about getting sick in his car and then wishing that he'd opened the window first. And I had done the same thing. And then he said he always kept his windows up so no one would realize he didn't have air conditioning. And so I just started laughing. And I sat there in that meeting, and I was laughing, and I thought, this is the first time in about 10 years I have ever genuinely laughed without the aid of some Colombian product. And it was just such a relief, because it was just kind of like some burden had been taken off my back, and I thought, phew, I'm here, I can relax, it's okay to laugh. And I hadn't felt that way, I think, since I was a little kid. My folks used to take me to the movie theater, and sometimes in the middle of the movie, I'd get into the movie, and I would relax for a minute, and everything would be okay. And I felt that way again. I thought, everything's all right, I'm safe here. And I also heard a fellow named David Yu stand up, and he started talking about anxiety attacks, and he looked like a big lumberjack. He talked about being so terrified from fear that he couldn't even move. I thought, that's amazing, that's just the way I feel. And I didn't know anyone else ever felt that way, and it just was such a relief to find there was one other person that felt like that. And I went up and I started talking to him about the way I felt and the things that I could never tell anyone because I knew they'd lock me up. And he said, well, a lot of people have this problem when they stop drinking, Bill. If you just keep coming back, it's going to get better, and you're going to start feeling a lot better, and you won't be hyperventilating all the time, and you won't feel like you're going to have a massive stroke every 3 minutes like you have been. And I said, I'll try that. And Dave gave me some excellent advice, because he said that while trying to get better, he had gone through a whole series of different hospital programs, and he had worked with a number of therapists. And the thing that had worked for him was coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and maintaining sobriety. And from talking to him and other people in the group, I came to believe that there was a recovery for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't go through therapy, and I didn't go into a hospital. I just kept going to meetings. I told a lady who had long-term sobriety that I wanted to join Alcoholics Anonymous. How did I do it? And she said, you take out ashtrays. So I thought, well, that's something I can do. And I started taking out ashtrays. And in addition to that, I started setting up chairs and doing things that were suggested of me. And it got better. It started getting better right away. And I asked someone to be my sponsor. And I asked Tom to be my sponsor simply because he laughed all the time. And I wanted to be around someone who was cheerful. And he took me aside and he said, well, before he would agree to be my sponsor, he wanted to know why I thought I was an alcoholic. And I said, well, I'm sort of vague about this whole thing. It's all new to me. But and I started telling him a little bit about my story. And I had gone on for about 3 minutes, and he suddenly stopped me, and he said, Bill, we don't judge other people, and no one can tell whether anyone else is an alcoholic except that person. But I will tell you one thing. You're in the right place. And, that was such a relief, because I had never felt that I was in the right place. And I thought, well, I can stay here. It's all right to be here, and I can do the things that we've been asked to do. And I got over a lot of my fear through setting up meetings. It was possible to come into a meeting when there were 3 people in a coffee pot, and that's what I did. And I would set up chairs, and I still do that. And then people came in the meeting gradually, and I got acquainted with them as they came in. So it wasn't the same feeling of terror that I would have walking into a room that was filled with people. And so I did that very slowly and very gradually, and people really helped me. And sometimes I would have to call people and say that I was going completely out of my mind, and I was losing contact with reality. When I was told you could never leave a meeting early, and I was in a Tuesday step study one night, and I just suddenly started going off into the ozone again. And it's funny, after all the years that I spent trying to get off into the ozone, now I was struggling so desperately just to try to stay in reality. And here I was in this meeting, and I was about to lose contact with reality. It's the only thing I can say. And I turned to the person next to me very calmly, as I could, and said, Marty, what do you do when you feel that you're completely gone and you don't know how to stay in this room, and you don't even know how to stay in your body? And Marty didn't get upset at all. He just very calmly said, hang on to the table and stare at the 12 and 12. And he said it so matter-of-factly, I knew he'd been there. So I went through the rest of that meeting holding on to the table and staring at the 12 and 12, and that's how I got through that meeting, and that's how I got through lots of things. And one time I was so terrified I couldn't get out of bed, and my sponsor came by the house because he said I'd been acting strangely, and he was pounding on the front door, and I couldn't get out of bed to go to the door, and finally he made such a noise, and I had 3 dogs at that time. They were all barking, and you cannot have a decent anxiety attack with some maniac trying to break the door down and 3 dogs all barking. So I got out of bed and went to the door, and he said, Bill, what's wrong? Why didn't you go to work or do anything today? And I said, well, I can't. I can't even get out of bed. And he looked at me. He said, well, I don't think that's exactly accurate. And I said, oh, well, I guess I am out of bed. So he made me walk to a local restaurant and meet him for lunch that day. And I said, I can't walk. I can't leave the house. He said, all you have to do is put one foot in front of the other. And all of a sudden I discovered, I got down the street just putting one foot in front of the other. And all of these goofy phrases we hear over and over again, I kept doing them. I still do today. And I put one foot in front of the other. By gosh, I got to that restaurant. And Tom said, you know you're totally mixed up. I know you're totally mixed up. But there's not one person in the restaurant that knows how you feel. And you're judged by actions, not feelings. And you don't have to worry about how you feel because you're acting okay. So I continued acting as if I was okay and that I could do these things and I could go into grocery stores. And I started feeling better. And then I had to do other things, like doing this inventory. And I had to do my 5th step, and Tom told me to relax, that there were only certain things that could be done. And he'd heard all of them. And there hadn't been a new emotion in 2,000 years. And I was so worried about all these secrets that I had, and I wasn't going to tell anybody. But I thought, well, all right. So I started telling him, and about 5 minutes later he said, you did what? And I thought, oh no, I've come up with something new. And the reason I had gotten such a reaction is because he had done the same exact thing. And by the time I finished this 5th step, I realized that Tom had known exactly where I was all the way along because he had been there, and he'd had the same feelings that I had had. And I would start a sentence, and he would finish it, and he would say, "And then this happened, didn't it?" And I said, "Yes." And he presented to me a program of hope, and there were a lot of things that I have to work on, procrastination being a main one, but there were so many character defects. But I thought at last there is some hope, and I didn't have to do it alone because I was told that God would help me through all these things. And I had to do things like sharing a lot of my back experience with the Internal Revenue Service, and, which is an ongoing thing. But things were getting better, and I was starting to really enjoy life and feel like a human being. But then, about 3 years ago now, I came up with an illness, and I had some symptoms. And they were the sort of symptoms that I never would have told anyone. When I'd been drinking, I would have switched brands. That's all. I would have stopped going to that particular bar or something, but I sure would have told anyone. But I went to the doctor because I was starting to feel good, and I didn't want anything to upset me in there. So the doctor said, "Well, it's probably something minor, but we'll have an operation," which they did in December 3 years ago. And after the operation, the doctor came in the room, and he was not smiling. In fact, he looked glum. And I said, "Doctor, you know, I'm an adult. You don't have to mince any words with me. I just want the straight truth. Tell me what it is you're trying to say." And he said, "Well, what I'm trying to say is that we found that you have cancer and you may die in 2 years, or 2 months, not 2 years." And I thought, gosh, I wish he could have worded that a little differently. You know, when I said honest, I didn't mean that honest. And but he said that possibly I could have another operation. So I had a whole series of tests, and I went through bone scans and radioactive isotopes, and I don't know, every sort of thing that you could have to see how far it had spread. And it was in my abdomen. I didn't know whether it had gone in my lymph nodes, and the whole thing was dreary. And I didn't know how I was going to get through all this. And I went through one day at a time, like so many other people. My sponsor's wife has fought cancer for 8 years, and so she was a great help to me in doing all this. And at one point I thought, I cannot have one more scan. I'm so sick of this whole thing. And I was about to go in for some other bone scan, thinking I was on a dolly in the hospital, and there was a young man right next to me, and getting x-rayed, and I looked over at him. We were both on gurneys, and he was lying there, and I was lying there, and I looked over at him, and I said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "Well, he damaged his lungs through using cocaine freebasing it somehow." And they were x-raying to see how much damage he'd done. And so all of a sudden I said, "You know, you don't have to do that anymore if you don't want to." And I found I was telling my story, and somehow I forgot about the bone scan that I was about to go in. So things kept coming up, and but I was told that it was going to be possible to have this other operation, but I was told there were no big deals. And when they said the operation was going to take 8 hours, there were going to be 6 doctors, I said, "That is a big deal. I don't care what you say. That is a big deal." And I went to my sponsor, and I said, "How can I go back through this operation? It's going to be awful." And I moaned and groaned, and he said, "Well, Bill, you don't need any courage. You just have to show up." And I thought, oh, well, I can do that. That's no problem. I just have to show up. So the day came when it was about time to show up, though, and the night before, Tom and Colleen had a buffet supper at their house, and they invited a lot of friends over, and I was going to go to the hospital that Monday, and this operation was going to be the following Wednesday. And so everyone very politely talked about how well everything was going, and what a beautiful day it was, and no one talked about illness, cancer, or anything. And so it was kind of an unnatural event for AAs, because we normally just talk about things constantly. And but before the dinner was over, my friend Lynn stood up, and he said he wanted to make an announcement, and that was that everyone knew that Bill was going to go to the hospital on Monday, and everyone knew it was going to be fine, and his operation was going to be okay on Wednesday. But just in case, while everyone was there, he wanted to announce that he was having a memorial service at his house the following Sunday at 2 o'clock. And I just started laughing. What can you say? I just started laughing, and then when I started laughing, everybody started laughing, and all of a sudden it was back to AA again, because there were 30 people all talking at once and nobody listening, and it was just great. And people were all trying to to give me support and help, and their experiences, and everyone knew someone, and it was just great. And that took all the power out of it. And I thought, it isn't a big deal. The power was gone, and I have many opportunities to tell about the miracle that's happened in my life because it was measurable. The day before this operation, a cardiologist came who examined me when I first got sober because my heart was doing kind of strange things and my blood pressure was very high. And so he came to examine me. I think they were taking bets on whether I was going to live through this operation or not. And so he examined my heart and he said, you know, your blood pressure is absolutely normal and your heartbeat is normal. He said, what are you on? And I said, I'm not on anything. I haven't had any tranquilizers or anything. And he said, well, how can you be so calm the day before major surgery? I don't understand this. And someone who was as nervous as you were. I said, well, you don't understand. I don't have to do anything. I just have to show up. The people who should be nervous are the doctors. They're the ones that have to be there. And so he said, that's amazing. He went off scratching his head. What is all this thing about turning it over to God? And but that's what I was trying to do. And the night before I had that surgery, I had told the people in the hospital I had some very close family members that would come and see me. In fact, I said my closest family members were Tom, my sponsor, and my friend David H. that I got sober with. And I said those were my closest family members, and they were the ones that had the power to make any decisions about unplugging life-saving things or anything else. My other family members, my mother, who's now 89, and I certainly didn't want her contacted about some emergency. So I had said that Tom and these other people were my family, and so they had special permission. They were up in my room till about 10 o'clock the night before this operation. And the last thing that Lynn said when he walked out of the room, he looked around all these flowers, and he said, I want you to water those suckers tonight because we're not going to buy new ones for your service. And I started laughing about that. And so the nurse came in after they left, and she said, what on earth are you people all laughing about? And I told her. She was very quiet, and she said, well, you have a very large family, but they're strange. I said, yes, and thank God. But I got through that, and I came to at South Coast Hospital in intensive care, and I was told that that's where I would be, and I didn't realize it, but Tom and my friend David had maintained a vigil at the hospital the whole time this long operation was taking place, and I've done the same thing twice this year. A member of our group has gone through an operation, and I was at the hospital maintaining a vigil, because that's the way this whole thing seems to work. I was told that we don't do anything alone, and that's literally true. But I revived, and I looked up, and Tom and David were in intensive care. They'd allowed them to come in and for just a moment, and I looked up, and I had tubes and wires and clickety things going all over. And this doctor is looking down at me, and he said, who am I and where are you? Oh, you're Dr. Young, and this is South Coast Hospital. And he said, well, gee, that's wonderful. Well, you have revived, and we think the operation was successful. And he turned to Tom very quietly, and he said, you can say a few words to him for just a minute if you'd like. And Tom came over and very quietly said, how are you doing? I said, well, I'm doing better than the doctor. He doesn't even know who he is. So Tom and David just looked at each other and they said, he's okay. And they went home. And I was okay, and I'm still okay today. I've had ups and downs, but there's nothing that I've had to do alone, and there's nothing that I've had to do without the aid of God. I discovered in that hospital that as long as I tried to maintain contact with God, it was okay. And that's what I try to do on a daily basis. And I've had a lot of trials and difficulties this last year. My little dog died. He was 18 years old. He'd been my constant companion for so many years. And I didn't know how to handle that. And he had been very ill, and I came home, and he was extremely ill, and he died in my arms. And I couldn't handle that. And I was driving down the street in Corona Del Mar, and I was sitting at a stop signal, and I suddenly started crying. And I looked, and the people on both sides of me were staring at me, and I thought, oh, those people think that that man should not be driving in traffic, is what they're thinking. And I started laughing a little bit about that. But I got through that through remembering something that Chuck C. had said many times. And Chuck had pointed out that on the terrace of his house in Laguna that his bougainvillea is a very happy bougainvillea. And that's because it wants to be a bougainvillea. It doesn't want to be a lily, and it doesn't want to be a tulip. All it wants to do is to be a bougainvillea, and God has given it everything necessary to be a happy, fulfilled bougainvillea. And the little hummingbird buzzing around is so happy being a hummingbird, because God has provided it with everything that's necessary to be a happy little hummingbird. And it doesn't want to be an eagle, and it doesn't want to be a rooster. And why would we think that God hadn't provided us with everything that's necessary? And I realized that this dear little doggy had been provided with everything by God that was necessary for him to be a happy little semi-terrier for 18 years. But it was time for him to go and join God, and that was just a perfectly natural part of his life. And I realized that God had given me everything that was absolutely necessary for me to lead a happy, complete life. And why would I think that I had to do anything alone? Because I knew once again that God was with me, and went through that. And so my life has changed radically, and I don't know how to explain what has changed, but I know it has changed, and I know it's noticeable. I have a lady friend that I have known for many, many years, well, since we were both 15. It's a little confusing because now I'm 12 years older than she is. My friend Margaret and I have had many differences along the way, and one of the differences is that she's still drinking and I'm not, and that led to many clashes. But today we get along fine because I do not comment on Margaret's drinking, and Margaret does not comment on my sobriety, and so we worked out some sort of a mutual understanding. But one day Margaret said something that surprised me. She said, I have really opposed your going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't understand why you hang around with all those people and go to all those places. But I do know one thing: in the years that you have been sober, you've become a man. And I thought, that is amazing, particularly that Margaret would say something like that, because we never used to communicate very well. And I realized that that's all I ever wanted. I just wanted to feel like a man, and I feel that way today. And that's another gift of this program. And that's when I was trying to play softball, and when I was going boating all the time. And that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to feel like a man. And I never knew how to do that. And I go to a men's stag in Laguna, and I really enjoy that. That's been an important part of my sobriety, sitting in a group with other men and listening to them tell about their problems, and realizing how we all have the same problems. And many of the things that I thought were just secret difficulties that I was having are difficulties shared by all of these people. And some of the men that I thought were so self-assured had the same feelings of inadequacy that I had. And it's been an eye-opener, realizing that I didn't have to do anything alone. So today I'm so happy to be here, and so happy to be in a room that is filled with love. And I heard Dr. Paul talk about love just a few weeks ago, and he said it's kind of difficult when you go into a meeting where you don't know any of the people personally to say that you love them all, but he understands the feeling of love that takes place in our fellowship, and that feeling is that I know there's not one person in this room that wants me to get drunk, and I know that I do not want one alcoholic in this room to ever take another drink, and that's the basis of love. If that isn't love, I don't know what it is. And it's just it's so exciting to go on and be with people who feel that way. I know as long as we all stick together, we don't have to take a drink, and I know that we'll all be able to walk through anything with dignity.